access the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Welcome, everyone, to a very special episode of the podcast of OA. I'm your co-host, Myron Rumsey, and I am joined by our good friend, Phil Bova. Phil, my friend, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, buddy. Just here at work, taking care of business as usual and stuff, and the wife is at home taking care of little Clark.
So today's a little bit different. You're actually at work today, and I had to take part of a day off of work because we got a really neat opportunity. Last year when I went to Terrificon, I talked to Liam Sharp, and we had him sign those prints for us to give away. And I asked him about coming on the show, and he said, sure. We were going to record something then, but it was so hectic and it was so busy, and Liam felt a little frazzled. He thought, I really can't give you a good conversation in this environment. Let's try to reschedule something later. And he and I have been conversing on and off for a little bit. And just recently he contacted me and said, hey, I've got some time coming up this week. What do you say we get together? And he's on the West Coast. So you and you're more in the middle, slightly East Coast, and I'm on the East Coast. So to get things to work together, you and I are kind of making some changes to our workday to catch Liam at 9 o'clock his time, to have a great conversation about Green Lantern. I'm very excited to talk to Liam.
Hey, that's okay. I'll take the time aside anyway. I was going to do it anyway. I would have taken the day off today to do it, so it doesn't matter to me.
So let's get Liam on the phone here in a couple minutes, and we'll be right back, and we'll start our conversation with Liam Sharp.
All right, awesome. Looking forward to it.
Listen up, Lanterns. It's time you took the oath with Green Lantern John Stewart. In brightest day, in blackest night, don't let the podcast of OA escape your sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power. Green Lantern's light.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are joined by a veteran of over 30 years in the comic book industry. Liam Sharp debuted in England, where he's originally from, with 2000 AD books like Judge Dredd, and went on to work for Marvel. And since 2008, he's been DC exclusive, and we all know and love his work on the Green Lantern. Liam, welcome so much to the podcast of OA.
Oh, God, has it been so long? I can't believe it. I'm getting old. Thank you for having me on the show. It's delightful. Cheers.
Thank you, Liam. And with your accent, you've immediately made this episode the most classy and intelligent sounding of any of them we've recorded.
I do. In England, I don't sound so classy and intelligent, believe me. I'm a northerner. I'm a working class northern stock, so that's all right. But in America, you can kind of get away with anything. You got that accent.
We're gullible that way. So I want to thank you publicly. When we were over in Terrificon last year, we were celebrating the 10th year anniversary of the website that our podcast is a part of, and you were so gracious to sign a bunch of prints for me and didn't charge me for them. And we did a little contest and gave them away. So about 24 people got signed prints by you that I shipped them all over to various parts of the country to people who may not get a chance to see you at conventions. So I thank you for helping us with that and making a lot of people really happy.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I saw a few of them on Twitter, so it's great that they made it out to those people. And I just thank them for their support, really.
It's when you start doing a book like Green Lantern, or you worked on Wonder Woman and a number of other iconic characters, do you ever look at the fact that you're one of a select group of people who inherit this legacy, and you get to play with them for a little while? And in Green Lantern, for particular, it's the 80-year anniversary of Green Lantern, and you've joined the likes of Gil Kane and Joe Giella and Neil Adams. Does that ever weigh on your mind as you're working on a book?
Oh, increasingly. I think the older you get as well, and the longer you're in the industry, the more you kind of realize the weight of that legacy. It's funny because when I was younger and more of a kind of punk, and we were all punk-ass kids at Marvel UK, you're slightly less respectful in a way. And it's not intentional. It's just your enthusiasm sometimes gets the better of you, and you kind of so full of ideas and energy and throwing stuff around, and you're a little bit more prone to be I guess, cavalier with the characters. But as you get older, you sort of realize, as you said, that you're part of this unbroken chain of astonishing creators, and you're breathing really rarefied air. So I am extremely aware of that, and I try to be very respectful.
You become more refined.
Yes, I should say. I feel like I need to light a cigar now and get my cravat on.
So you broke some good news yesterday. Originally the Green Lantern season 2 was going to be 12 issues, and it got cut back to 8, but now it's back to 12. That's correct?
It's 12, yeah. I mean, it was always floating around. It was up and down. There was nothing absolutely carved in stone, so I kept relatively quiet. But yes, we're back to 12, which is great. I didn't mean it to be the big break of the news that it was, but it was. Lots of people were asking me how I felt about it, and it just seemed like, well, it's 12, and that's that. And I'm thrilled that it is. That was always the plan. That was what we wanted to do right from the start, and it's nice to be seeing it through in the way that we intended it. Because Grant had a very, he had an overarching plot structure for all of these, so. It's good that we don't have to kind of try and cram it into a smaller space.
We're happy and excited as Green Lantern fans, because we love the book, and we really love what you bring to the book. When I write about my reviews or we talk about it on the podcast, the one word I always use to describe your artwork, and I hope you take it with the way I mean it, is as I always use the word lush, because there's so much detail and it's so saturated with character and with nuances and subtlety in the expressions of the characters, and there's just so much to look at, and so I mean it in the most positive way possible.
Oh no, I take it. I would have said that like Tom Palmer's inks were lush. So I take that as a huge compliment, and I get exactly where you're coming from. It's definitely what I aim for. Barry Smith, I would say, is also one of those guys I would have described as lush. So yes, thank you. I take it as intended, and not that you're calling me an alcoholic on a podcast.
So for us, we're one issue into season 2. What issue are you working on right now?
I'm on 4 at the moment. It's a completely bonkers issue, and just for a change. And each issue I never know where it's going to go. Grant and I talk about it ahead of time, but then it always kind of goes deeper and richer than I would have ever imagined, which is part of the fun and means that. I get a giggle every time I get a new script through, because it's always highly entertaining.
I can't imagine what the scripts look like.
They're the sort of pleasure of them is that Grant often chips in a little anecdote about his childhood, or when he read this issue, or a particular reference that he's got in there. There was a friend of his when he was growing up who. The Young Guardians are very much a tribute to, because he kind of shared his love for comics with this guy, and this guy just drew the same 3 characters again and again. They were his own characters, and they were these kind of large-headed, sexless superheroes, because they were evolved beyond the need for sex. And so the Young Guardians are kind of a tribute to this guy. And there's little anecdotes like that he always goes off on a little tangent for 2 or 3 pages, and just you get a little insight into his past and who he is, and it's really charming, actually.
Does that ever influence how you approach the artwork you do on the page?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, because I think at this stage we both know the influences we've had, and we know where our the stuff that we grew up with finds common ground, and so he's really drawing to my strengths and the stuff that I love, and it does cross that whole boundary between sort of English, European, and American comics. It's the whole sort of gamut of those different areas, and those different approaches. So it is like what did Grant say? He said it's like he says it's like European English and American comics got together and had a threesome, and this is the offspring of that.
That's a great point. It's a great way to put it.
So for us, looking back in that first issue of this season, that scene on the Grand Hall of Oa, you must have had to have a drink after you drew that scene, because there's so much in it. There's just so much. And I wondered if things like when, Grant has a character Xanthos of Zarala that was in maybe one book in the 1970s. Does he give you the photo reference? Or does he make you Google it to find out what that character was supposed to look like originally?
Thankfully, the editorial team are really good, and so they will send some interns scurrying off to do all the reference research. But sometimes I'll get the script on a Friday, and it's the weekend, and I will want to jump in before. And in that case, it was the weekend, so I had to Google most of it myself. But that's part of the fun, honestly. I get informed when I do that, because a lot of the time I haven't seen these stories or heard of the characters. So it gives me a little bit more information on them when I have to do it myself. And that informs how you're going to draw them and how you're going to represent them. But that spread, I'm an idiot, because I really thought, okay, season 2, I can't even attempt to top what I did in season 1, because I put so much into that. And I thought, I'm going to streamline my style and concentrate on the storytelling and the figure drawing and make it less detailed. And then I did that issue, which is by far the most detailed issue I've ever drawn of anything ever. And I just, I don't know what I'm thinking sometimes. It was quite a I don't know, high bar to set myself. And but I'm glad I did. I did enjoy that particular spread, because there's lots of characters, as you said, that have been from the past that are sort of that may have only appeared in a single panel or a single issue, or stuff from way back in the Broom days and the Kane days. But I like to sort of pepper it with unseen characters too, so you have to second guess the ones that did exist and the ones that didn't. And there's also obviously me and Grant making an appearance in there at the bar. That was fun.
Great.
That was really cool. I liked that a lot. That was neat.
I really like the bear in that scene. I love that, here we are in this mad future kind of science fiction world, and there's this bear in a suit, in a space suit, and this kind of character's pulling a penny out of his ear, and he's absolutely delighted by it. And it's like the most simple trick that we've seen 1,000 times, but he's obviously never seen it before. It's really it's making him grin.
The dog with the squirrel on his shoulder is pretty funny too.
Yeah, I like the dog and the squirrel. There's a cat behind him, sort of eyeing him up slightly warily as well.
The detail you put in, you commented on that, about how much detail you put in, and it's one of the things that, some people just read the story for the sake of the story, and then there are people like myself who I like to think of the books as almost a diary or a snapshot where we're peeking in on another reality. And so the details that you put in are not wasted on us, because we look at that and it makes it easy for us to imagine what it must be like, and it makes it feel organic and real.
Well, I think that's the thing, isn't it? You need to have naturalistic stuff going on in the background, otherwise it feels like a performance less than in reality. I think sometimes you can see sort of environments that look more like they've been created over a couple of weeks for a convention, to kind of stand out, but they don't feel like they've been lived in and battered around and been built over centuries and have a lot of different architectural styles. And it's like the Oa spread from issue 2, way back in issue 2. That thing, the thinking behind that was like, how do I make this place really feel like it's somewhere that you could visit, and that has, different areas, like little parkland areas, and stuff that is just being built and is new, and stuff that is, a few centuries old, and different architectural approaches to things. So I do think about that, and I do think about the environments in terms of, they're as important as the characters. So I think that's where we get the European influence really, in this book, mostly anyway.
I love Raikotoro.
Yeah, Rick. We love Rick. Or Reich. But yeah, we've called him Rick. That the first time I drew his face with just the two dots and the line, it just made me chuckle. You know, it's like, how can you make it as simple as possible and still kind of imbue it with personality? Someone said he was like C-3PO, and I think that's actually a really good. That's a good way of putting it. He's got that kind of slightly annoying verbal diarrhea, you know.
Well, he's also kind of like, he doesn't pick up on sarcasm and things like that because he's so almost so naive almost.
Yeah, no, he's delightful. We fell in love with that guy. We seem to fall in love with a new character every issue. There's always somebody, you know.
So first season, you guys spent a lot of time on other worlds, and with at least the setup for the second season, it looks like we're going to be spending a lot more time on Earth. Is that pretty accurate? Is most of the books going to be Earthbound?
I wouldn't want to say.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, a little bit and a little bit not. So, you know, I think the fun is to be had in space. It's fun. I mean, a lot of people love the Earthbound stuff, and I get it. But we've got a lot to tell and a lot of loose ends to tie up. So I think he's going to be bouncing around as much in season 2 as he was in season 1.
In season 1, we got the Green Lantern, Green Arrow team up, and I understand we're getting a Flash team up this time.
Absolutely. That's the one I'm drawing now, which is fun.
I love it. I can't wait to see nuts. It. Do you find yourself in a position where I've got to top myself every time I approach a book? Because you sound like you put so many hours into this that this is almost a marathon for you.
Oh, it's definitely a marathon. There's no question. But like you said, where Grant cuts me some slack is that he keeps it so interesting that it never feels like I'm drawing the same thing twice. And so, you know, every news, it's a funny one. You can be absolutely exhausted and wiped out and just think, I never want to draw another Green Lantern issue. And then the script comes in and you're immediately kind of engaged again and energized and off you go, you know. So it's a joy. But I'm definitely putting everything I've got into this. I think it's fairly obvious.
Oh, it is. I mean, the work is exceptional.
Thank you.
I was going to ask. I know a lot of artists that I've spoken with over the past. You know, they're usually never happy with their finished work. And looking at your stuff, you know, and this goes back to the Brave and the Bold when you did Wonder Woman and Batman. I've always been curious that where do you draw that fine line to where you feel comfortable enough to pass this along, that you're finished with it and you're happy with it, or is there ever a case where you're just not ever fully happy with your product when you send it off for to get published?
You're never fully happy. The only thing that gets you there is the deadline. Honestly, you know. Yeah. And I've had to let pages go that I would have definitely redrawn. The funny thing is, though, often the pages that you feel kind of disappointed by, people respond to in some sort of way. You can never pick which ones are going to land and which ones aren't. Right. Sometimes the ones that you really labor over, that you're really proud of, kind of disappear under the radar a bit, and people don't sort of fully appreciate the work that went into it, which is fine as well, by the way, because that doesn't matter. If the work's invisible and you're doing it right in a way, you know, because you're not stopping the reader dead in his tracks every time. I do want people to be able to take time with it and go back and revisit it, but I don't want to be in the way of the storytelling. You know, it has to flow.
One of the things about this run is that it really benefits by being reread. So I think I've appreciated the art more because I'm rereading the books more than before. I know when I write my reviews, I have to read each issue like 3 or 4 times to make sure I'm not missing something, or I'm out Googling a character. Like I know this character from somewhere, and I don't want to overlook it in my review because I want you guys put so much energy into it. I feel like, you know, I need to provide that extra level of detail when I can find it.
Do you know, it's funny. I was thinking about this the other day, and with the exception of music, I think comics are the art form that you're most likely to revisit again and again and again. You know, you don't do it. How many times can you watch a film? I mean, probably a lot over a lifetime, but I still think that my favorite well, I know for sure that my favorite comics I've revisited more times than any other sort of novel or film or, you know, anything like that. It's comics and music. They're the two things that you go back to again and again.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a really good point.
So in that sense, you know, you want to keep putting stuff in that is rewarding for a long time. You know, I found I can still look at, say, a black and white artist edition of Barry Windsor Smith's sort of Red Nails or something like that, and it's always rewarding. There's always something new that you didn't spot before, or you know, an approach to the inking, or a little detail, or a subtlety in the action that just makes it like fresh and discoverable every time you look at it. So I try really to do that. I want it to be a book that will grow with you, you know.
I think it definitely is. Now, to jump into the craft a little bit, you know, we're 21st century now, and so there's a lot of technology that's going into the making of comics and digital art and so on. How much of your work do you do digitally versus how much do you do, you know, the old-fashioned paper and pencil?
It's all pen, paper, and ink, really. There's a few things like this, the cosmic stuff I will do digitally sometimes, because it's just, you get a much more, when you're talking about dust clouds and suns and, you know, things like that, it's kind of, you can get more sense of distance and scale if you do it digitally. But for the most part, I'm drawing pen and ink on a very large scale so that I can get the detail in, but still be gestural. I do like to have a little bit of expression in the line. I find when I go smaller, it tightens up and it loses some of the energy a bit, weirdly.
Huh.
So I want to ask you a question about something that's not even Green Lantern related. I was doing some research about your career, and I came across you helped set a world record for the fastest production of a comic book and the most contributors to a comic book. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it was at Mark Miller's Cabal convention in London, Islington, a few years ago. Was it 2007, something like that? And I don't think I even knew about it in advance, but it was like we got there and it's like, okay, all the guests are going to do a panel, and we just, that was kind of it. It was almost like a fait accompli. We're going to do this thing. Mark had set it up in advance, and everyone just kind of got handed their panel and got on with it, and that was that. I think we had like an hour each to do a panel, from what I remember. It was a while ago. But that's one of those things that happened so sort of quickly and in the moment that you kind of did it and forgot about it. And strangely, this is the second time someone's brought it up in the last 2 days. It's probably the first time I've spoken about it for over 10 years.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So did you have any trepidation when you got approached to do this series?
No, not for a second. The opposite, actually. It was because it's so funny the way everything's worked in the last few years, from Wonder Woman to The Brave and the Bold to this. It's been so sort of organic and natural, and almost like it was meant to happen. Grant and I kept bumping into each other. It's the story is sort of a bit bigger than that. What happened was, I did a podcast when I was doing Wonder Woman. I did a podcast quite early on, and I was talking about a book that I'd written, my second prose novel, and how it was a very personal book, and it was very meta, and it was about the town that I'm from and Midland mentality and a disappearing voice of the people that I grew up with, and a very, very personal but very strange book. And the people who were interviewing me said, "Oh, that sounds like Grant Morrison would love that. Do you know Grant?" I was like saying, actually, I get really nervous around Grant. I've known him for years, but I kind of get a little bit tongue-tied and shoe starey and kind of don't know what to say and shuffle off into the background and then kick myself later for not having been more sort of forthcoming. And they were like saying, "Oh, he's lovely, you should talk to him." Literally 2 days later in San Diego, I was at the Hyatt and I was just leaving and Grant was coming in and he went, "Liam!" and gave me this huge hug. I was like, "Oh, that's weird. Okay." And it sort of reset our relationship. And we had this really energized little 2-minute talk and disappeared in different directions. And then we kept bumping into each other. So we met at the Wonder Woman premiere, and then we met in New York, and then we met again in LA at some other thing. And we kept bumping into each other. And every time we did, we had longer and longer chats. I think, the Wonder Woman premiere, we were the last two there as they were taking the bar down pretty much. Sort of just chatting about potential and ideas and possibly doing a story together, and a creator-owned thing was what we were talking about. And I said, "Well, what's the chance of you doing something for DC?" And he said, "Oh no, I'm done. I'm never doing anything for them again. I'm finished with superheroes. I've got." He actually said, "I've got 15 years left," very precisely, because that's Grant. It's probably chaos magic thing, but he knows precisely that he's got 15 years left of creative time. And and I don't want to. I wanted to be spending that doing my own thing. And then obviously Dan pitched him Green Lantern, and he went, "No, I'm not interested. But if you're going to do it, you should do this." And then he proceeded to pitch it to Dan, and then talk himself into it. So then Dan just phoned me up out of the blue. I was going to do. Dan wanted me to do Hawkman originally, and then there was some talk about me doing the Justice League with Scott. So I was trying to decide which of those two to do, and then he just phoned up out of the blue and said, "This is a bit left field, but how do you fancy doing Green Lantern with Grant?" I said, "It's a no-brainer. Let's do that. We've been talking. We were going to do something anyway. Let's do something bigger." So I jumped at it. Honestly, I love Grant. So and it's just just been great.
I was going to ask about the relationship that you and Grant have, and I mean, it seems like you guys work really well together, considering how much we've read of Green Lantern all the way up until this point. How long have you guys been friends for?
Well, like I say, we've been acquaintances for a very long time, but we've been friends in the last few years.
That's really cool.
So, we when we do get on the phone together, we'll talk for a couple of hours, and it just disappears. He's just such a generous writer to work with. He writes to my strengths. He knows what he wants to get out of me and what he can get out of me. And I think the other thing too is right early on, almost as a test in the first issue, he wrote this single panel that was 2 pages long, and had so many references and details in it, and I put all of them in and then added some more. And I think that was from that point, it was like, he's not going to cut any corners, and he's going to do that. Because the thing as well, and something Grant was saying to me, sometimes he makes an assumption that people are going to understand that the details he's putting in are there for a reason, because there's every chance he's going to come back and reference them again, even if it's in a subtle way. And if they don't go in, then it can mess with his story. It can mess with the plan down the line. And his brain is so huge. He generally has got very subtle little details that are stretching way off into the future that there's no way anyone but him could foresee. So I tried to put every single thing in and a little bit more, so that I get some of myself in there. And it's turned into a quite delightful marriage, I think.
Well, I think stretching the reader is a good choice of words, because that's one of the things I find in reading his books is, so many comic books these days, especially superhero books, you can pick and read in 10 minutes and put it back down again, and it's all surface level. But your guys' work, it really begs to be reread to pick up on detail and nuance, because it does have weight. It isn't just thrown in there for padding.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. So it's all part of the world building, and it just deserves it. I think it deserves that treatment. if you're going to work with one of the world's very, very best writers, which evidently he is, you know, you don't want to be doing it in a half-assed way. You know, you want to do your best. You've got to go at it. Going back to what you were saying right at the beginning, you don't take it lightly, and you give it the respect that it deserves, and that's what I've tried to do. You know, and also, like you said too, I've been doing this 30 years. If I'm not going to keep reaching, then I'm just becoming a hack. I don't want to just rest on my laurels and sit back and just, you know, toss out this work in a very kind of samey, you know. I don't want it to become just a kind of. I don't want to become a parody of myself, or do you know what I mean? Sometimes
Sure.
you can end up doing that, and just you end up just replaying your top 10 endlessly.
Yeah, you're kind of just doing it for the paycheck and not for the art.
Exactly.
And I was gonna say, a lot of with this art that I've seen in Green Lantern season 1 and going into season 2, I've seen the envelope get pushed with you, because I read, you know, The Brave and the Bold, and I'm a big Wonder Woman fan, and I really like what you did with her characterization.
Thank you.
And I've seen your art develop more and more and more each time, especially since those Brave and the Bold issues, and even from your Judge Dredd stuff. And I'm always wondering to myself, I'm always thinking to myself, like, damn, does this guy know if there ever is an endpoint where he pushes himself to the limits of his artistic talent? And a lot of times when I talk to other artists, they always explain to me, you know, if you're a good artist, you don't ever draw a line. You have to surpass it each and every time to feel more accomplished when you're producing your material.
Yeah, that's so true. You know, I look at people like Bill Sienkiewicz, and he just blows my mind, and he just seems to can keep getting better and learning more and pushing himself in different artistic directions. I think some of it is, especially being back at DC now, it's like when I was doing Wonder Woman at the start, I was a little bit tentative because I thought, I don't want to blow this. It's got to be something people have seen before. It's got to be recognizable as a DC comic, you know, and something that fits into the American aesthetic of comics and isn't too kind of wild and different. And I think in increments as I've gone on over the last 4 years, I've been able to take little risks and incorporate more of me into the art. And I think it's a slow kind of introduction to the audience, so that you're not kind of jumping 2 feet in and alienating people right at the beginning. You know, it could have seemed too much, or it could have seemed too extreme, or it could have seemed too far outside of the established norms for what a mainstream comic should be. But I think the audience has grown a bit with me, and I am pushing myself too. So I'm not saying that this was always a plan or an intent, but I do think that I've got a little bit braver as I've gone on, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think you would, you know, and not only that, I think you should.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of artists. I mean, I don't know. A lot of artists I've spoken with, you know, there's been a couple where they just ran out of their own ideas in their head, and I'll be honest with you, looking at your stuff, Liam, it's like each passing page is like it was almost like a version of Where's Waldo, because you're like, well, okay, so there's this character there, and then way in the background there's so much depth that there's a character back there. Yeah, I recognize him, and I know Myron and I have always talked about how you and Grant both incorporate aspects of past Green Lantern stuff and bring them forward. And I know I'm appreciative, and I know Myron is, because we've been longtime readers for decades now. And it's so rich and fulfilling to see all this stuff being brought forth by you guys.
Well, that's great to hear. It's you know, you never know what percentage of your readers are going to pick up on all the tiny details. And honestly, it doesn't matter, because it should be accessible to anybody, whether they're a first-time reader or, you know, somebody who's really steeped in the lore of these characters. Sure. It needs to work in both ways. It's like, you know, it's a bit like the best kids' films ever play really well to adult audiences, because there's so many sort of Easter eggs and knowing nods and winks in there that are, for the grown-ups as well. So I feel like there's an element of us trying to do that, and obviously you can't please everybody. Some people would rather it was very much an earthbound slugfest with all the same old cast and characters, and that it looked more like a 90s book or whatever. Lots of people have different views about how it should be done. You can't let that affect you too much. You just have to trust your gut and do what you do as well as you can.
Well, I think with the comics medium, as time goes on, you have people like myself who've been reading for 45 plus years, and then you've got the newer person, and so our tastes are so diverse that it's really hard to please. You can't please everybody.
Well, you can't. It's impossible, and you shouldn't either. The second you're trying to please, I say trying to please fans. If you're actively just trying to please fans, then you're going to fail. Because the fans, as you say, are sometimes 4 decades old or 3 decades old or just a decade old, and their view of what the characters should be is defined by the decade that they fell in love with it.
Well, and not only that, you don't please yourself when you're when you're trying to please everybody else.
No, it's not. You can't backseat drive these titles. It's really important that creators dare to be creative. They have to. And sometimes I think there've been stories I really didn't like for whatever reason, and then I've come back to and found something in them that I understood better a bit later on. Again, to use a musical analogy, sometimes your favorite song on an album is the one you least liked when you first got the album. It grows on you, and it becomes it's more nuanced, and it's a little bit more difficult, and it's not so easy, and it takes time and it takes effort, and you put that time in and you fall in love with it. And I think sometimes people are expecting to instantly love everything the second it comes out, and I think that's a mistake to do that,
especially with such a high level of criticism these days in social media.
Yeah. Well, it's impossible. It's just impossible. So, I understand people are passionate, and I think it's great that they are, but sometimes they forget that the people who are doing it have come to this as fans, and that's editorial and artists and colorists and inkers and letterers. We've all come to it with love and passion for the medium in our hearts, and we're all doing the best we can. And not only that, this is how we feed our families. This is how we make our living. And if people call for us to lose our jobs or be kicked off, you're putting people's kids at risk. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's fine to say you don't like it, but anything beyond that, I think it's just dangerous, really, and cruel too. Yeah.
On a side note question, when you wrote yourself, when you drew yourself and Grant sitting at that bar, I'm just kind of curious. Do you know what drink Grant's got on the bar right there in front of him?
Oh, it'll be something psychedelic, I'm sure. Something.
It's probably absinthe.
Yeah, something he will have sourced from the planet that is very particular to that quadrant. Mine's likely just the local beer.
That's awesome.
Now, I'm going to get shot if I don't ask this question, so I have to ask it. With season 2 going to 12 issues, is there any chance of a season 3?
Oh, I would say almost certainly not. Sadly, we never talked beyond 12. Grant, I mean, we're lucky we got Grant for 12. Honestly, let alone 24.
True.
So I think for me, I'm just seeing it as this is. I know some people have said it's like an all-star Green Lantern. In my head, it's a little bit like that. I'm seeing it as something that will have, hopefully a really satisfying end. Not a complete full stop, but we'll feel like, if you pick up the 24 issues and read them cover to cover, you'll be satisfied. You won't be left kind of frustrated, and you'll feel like you had a body of work that was intended to be that body of work, rather than something that just slotted into a bigger narrative. Obviously, again, we wanted it to work within a bigger narrative without taking anything away from the work that's come before. But yeah.
So
sorry.
You're well, I that's the answer I expected to hear, but I know if I don't ask it, somebody's gonna say, well, you didn't ask him about this. So I've covered my backside a little bit there. So, you were on a Wonder Woman podcast and you dropped Grant's name and you ended up working with Grant. You're on a Green Lantern podcast. Is there anybody's name you'd like to drop to put the cosmic magic in flow?
Well, there's a few people I'd love to work with. I mean, really, I want to write more myself. This is it's a big deal for me to write, because I have, I've got another novel, which is waiting for publication. I've got 2 novels out already. Writing is a big part of what I do. So what I'd really like to do is at some point have a bit of a run on one of them ongoings. Just that's something I haven't really done, is write within the framework of an ongoing title. I don't really care what character, because what I've found literally every single time I've done a book is that even if it's a character I know nothing about, I fall in love with that character while I'm doing it. There's always something amazing about it. That's why they survive so long. So any character that's been on the shelves for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, there's going to be something worth looking at there. So I really don't mind which, but I'd love a go at that. But in terms of other writers, I'd love to do something with Warren Ellis one day. Garth is an old mate, so Garth Ennis is somebody I'd really like to do something with. And who else? I'd like Tom's writing a lot as well.
Tom Taylor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both the Toms, in fact. The two, so they're always getting mixed up online these days.
Tom King definitely needs an artist, because he did a sketch cover for me, and you've probably seen the stuff he posts on social media.
Oh, I love Tom King's sketch covers. He puts his all to shame.
He did a Green Lantern and Batman cover, and he has Hal saying, "Batman, you're my best friend" on it. It's hysterical. And he always writes "sorry" on it.
No, the Mr. Miracle series I just thought was fantastic. And one of the books that I have been getting as every month is that I've been following his Batman run. So I really like Tom's writing.
His Strange Adventures came out today.
Yeah. I was like, again, having drawn that character, it's like,
Right.
that would have been fun. Interesting to see his take on the character, on Adam.
I loved your drawing of him. I just fell in love with the character. He just reminded me like a cross between Flash Gordon and the Rocketeer, and I was like, man, that is spot on, beautiful.
We just wanted it to really reference that old sort of Al Williamson period, and the Carmen Infantino and all of those with the crazy buildings and everything. So we were very much paying an homage to that period. Even there's a bit of Wally Wood in there and all sorts. After the vampire issue, I wanted to make it much more of a clean, because the Vampire Planet had all these kind of weird, smoky, crawling panel borders, and then the next issue we made it very sort of formal. And again, that's the fun of working with Grant, is that you can approach each issue different in terms of the way you tell the story as well as anything else. They all have a different texture and a different quality and a different sort of character to them.
Well, it's funny that, when Phil had commented when we talked about that issue with Adam Strange when it came out, it was right before Terrificon. And when I was there, you had this beautiful print of Hal and Adam Strange, and I bought one and I had you sign it, and I sent Phil a picture saying, look what I got. And he was so dejected that he didn't have one, and was like, oh, I love it. So I went back to your table and bought the last one and had it signed, and I sent it to Phil without telling him and surprised him with a copy of it.
Oh my God, I love it so much. I'm gonna hang it up by my son's bed when he gets older.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, that was very much a tribute to Al Williamson. There's a Flash Gordon piece he did it was the very direct inspiration for that cover.
You can sense it, man. That's the first thing I thought. I was like, oh my gosh, that's just a callback to Flash Gordon. They're good Flash Gordon.
Well, I say this often, but we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, and there's nothing we can all learn from what went ahead. It's easy to keep reaching for the future, but that we should not forget to look back as well, and to remember the lessons from their experience, from what they learned, and channel a bit of that as and when we can.
So I want to be very careful of the time we're spending, and we're getting close to the 45-minute mark. So one thing I always ask people when we're doing an interview is there anything we didn't ask you that you would want to share? We would want readers to know about the work you're doing?
I never have an answer to this. I need to get my act together on that one, because I have been asked that a couple of times and I've never got an answer, and I never think about it. No, I don't think so, because you guys have been pretty on it with the stuff you're asking. I think most of the time I'm just in a fugue state, trying to turn out the work, in a timely fashion, driving myself slightly bonkers in the process. So it's not something I ever really think about.
Fair enough.
But if anything occurs to me in the next 15 minutes or so, I'll jump in and say.
Phil, do you have any more questions that you want to ask Liam?
No, I just I do want to add that I just got to say I appreciate all the heart that you put into this book. I mean, being a GL fan with Myron over the years, and it's just he's gone through so many different versions of the character and so many different versions of the story, and I'll tell you what, I remember thinking back, Myron, when you and I, when the run first started, you and I were very on the edge about, where's Grant going to take us? How's this going to go? And by issue 3, we were locked and loaded, and we were full on committed to how the story was developing. And then let alone having Liam's, your artwork on this thing. It's just like, it adds so much creativity to being like just sitting there reading it, like Myron said a couple times, just taking it all in, because you want to appreciate every small panel that even exists on the page, and even the ones that aren't panels when they're a full-blown spread.
Oh, thanks, guys. I mean, it means a lot when it's coming from real dyed-in-the-wool fans of the character, and again, going back to what I was saying about falling in love with the character, I totally love Hal. He's just great. I don't get it when people. I think I must have missed the period when he became an asshole, or an arsehole, as we English say. Because for me, he's always been the Green Lantern, right? And I do like that idea. I was talking to Grant about it a few weeks ago, and he was saying the thing is, John Broome made it really clear that in the future, the Green Lantern they're all talking about is Hal. He's the greatest of the Green Lanterns. He's the one that resonates down through the eons and becomes, universally known as the greatest Green Lantern. So what is that story, and why is he great? And you don't have to necessarily like him for a character to be that great. So look at Alexander the Great. I'm sure the guy was a massive arsehole, but he's still, people are still talking about him. The deeds are still considered great. So that's interesting. But I actually think Hal is more likable than that. I think he's, it's like Grant said, you know, if you were in a bar with him, he's definitely the person you'd be gravitating towards. He might not be the most reliable friend, and he's likely to disappear at the drop of a hat and probably not say goodbye. But you definitely would love seeing him whenever you did. And that's really fascinating. But also, I thought we both found it interesting that he was a little bit of a, particularly in these times, he was an interesting character to try and work with, because he's such a sort of unreconstructed, almost sort of, I know he was created before the 70s, but he has got a 70s vibe about him, a kind of macho male vibe about him that isn't current and isn't on the zeitgeist particularly right now, and isn't what everyone's looking for. And so that makes it quite interesting and quite a challenge. And I've really enjoyed that aspect of him. And I find him, I don't think Grant necessarily sees him this way, but I find him quite sad. I feel empathy towards him. I feel like he's reaching for something that isn't there, and he's only happy when he's working, like he's blocking stuff out. And I see him almost like the opposite of the Silver Surfer in a way. So whether he likes it or not, he's becoming a cosmic being, whereas Norrin Radd was becoming a human. You know, he was coming the other way and becoming more human. So that all sort of informs the character. So yeah, I suppose if I was going to say anything that I wanted to say, maybe it's that.
Yeah, I think when people look at the character of Hal, he's been written so many different ways. When John Broome wrote him, he was very much a much more scientific driven character, a very intelligent person. And then other individuals made him dumb and cocky, where he looked like he wasn't thinking about his actions. And yeah. I've always tended to look at him like a pro athlete or a fighter pilot, or in this case, obviously a test pilot would be, in which they process the information so quickly and come to a conclusion and take action in a split second that it appears like there's no forethought in it whatsoever.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And we like that idea as well. You know, the apocryphal story of the guy who comes to fix the machine and just basically hits it with a wrench and it starts working again. And that's what Hal's doing all the time. He might just be using a giant green hand to smash something, but it wouldn't work if anybody else tried it, because he knows exactly how and why he's doing it. You know. He's kind of a savant like that.
Yeah, he knows what's going to work, and so he just does what works.
Yeah, and it's very innate in him. He has got this innate genius for handling situations, and literally that split second thinking. You know, I got this mentality. I love that. I love the way Grant's really given him that. I got this. You know.
Yeah.
He's just thinking out loud. It's not a show off thing. It's like that's him processing, and you can see it. You can see him thinking. You can feel the cogs whirring, and I just love this character.
There's a neat scene between Batman and Green Lantern. I can't remember the book it was from, but they were teaming up together to try to rescue someone. And Batman was kind of ticked off at Hal because he was going in with bright lights whirring and, Green Lantern logos everywhere. And it's like, hey, I'm here. And that, of course, plays opposite to Batman's I need to be in the stealth in the dark. And he was kind of mad at Hal because he was doing this in your face thing. But probably from Hal's perspective, it's a case of, hey, if the lights are flashing on me, then the bad guy is going to focus their attention on me and not the people that he can hurt.
Yeah. And he was in his cop car probably. And he's being the policeman. It's like, the whirring lights and the noise. It's like, we've arrived. It's like, exactly. There are so many nuances and ways you can take it. And again, Grant's like, yeah, he's not a superhero. He's a cop. You have to remember that he's got it. He's got this. He's got these powers, but he's a cop.
Absolutely. Well, Liam, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it. We're really looking forward to, for us, the next 11 issues.
Oh yeah.
Thanks, guys. The issue 3 is going to be interesting. I coloured the whole of that one. That one's I pretty much painted that one digitally, so it has a really different feel. I'm sure there'll be a preview coming up soon. But I just saw the lettered pages of that, and it's quite an interesting departure. It's got these. Well, I won't say any more because the preview's not out yet. But I hope you enjoy it.
You can whisper it in our ear. Nobody's listening. No. All right. Well, thank you again, Liam. We really appreciate your time, and thanks again for everything.
Yeah, thanks
It was
a lot,
a pleasure.
buddy.
Thank you, Jen.
Great.
All the best. Take care.
Well, Phil, what'd you think?
Oh man, the guy is just a genuine, nice person. I mean, he's just so much fun to talk to. And you and I mentioned like you had said, you could just sit down in a bar with Liam and just have a good 5-hour conversation just about anything, and just to pick his brain on where he comes from, and to know how much that guy produces the artwork that we read every day, and the depth in which he does it. It's like, where does his mind go? I mean, I can't draw. I mean, I'm a stick figure person, if that. And when these artists come along that just really capture your eye, and Liam's been that way for me. And it's like you're amazed at what they have and the talent that just they produce.
Yeah, he's definitely a genuine person, and one of the things I think I said off mic is we've been so fortunate to have people.
Hey, that worked out good, man.
Perfect. So yeah. I'll let that out. So, we've been fortunate to have had a number of different creators on the show, from, the producers of the Green Lantern animated series to Robert Venditti to Ethan Van Sciver to, Dan Jurgens and several others. And almost without exception, all of the people we talk to are just, they realize they're talking to fans. So I think it's different for them because they're not talking to a media outlet where they feel like they're going to be asked a question that puts them on their heels, or it's very businesslike. And this is more of a casual conversation. So I think when we have these conversations with different creators, they're just organically they're more relaxed because we're having an ability to just have a chat.
Well, and not only that, a lot of us fans, a lot of the legitimate fans won't push for topics that sometimes make artists and writers uncomfortable. What kind of views in their political views or whatever in their background that they produce on paper and stuff like that. You don't necessarily push that agenda with them, being a true fan. Yet all you really need to do is just talk to them like they're a fan themselves, and which they are. And Liam made his point clear when it comes to that. I mean, look how much he talked about how much he loves Hal Jordan as a character, and we often forget, and I know I do too, when I'm reading some of these books, that these are fans that are just writing them. These are fans that are doing the artwork, and I often overlook that myself, and I do sometimes have to take a step back in the process of reading to know that. It may not be something I like. It may not be an artwork that I really, really is appealing to me, but they're a fan on their end too. And it's their interpretation of what it is from their perspective.
Right. And I think, what's interesting about Liam and Grant's run is that it is through a different lens than what we've seen in the past. You had the Jeff Johns era, and that certainly informed a lot of people about what their perceptions of Green Lantern are, because it was so popular. It drew so many new people in that have stuck with the characters. He certainly had his opinions on what drove Hal and how it worked. And when Robert Venditti came in, he had his own perspective, and it's slightly different than Jeff Johns and Grant Morrison and Liam Sharp. Their perspective is even more another take on the character. It's all true to the same kernel, the same core of the character, if you will, but they're still putting their own flavor and their own spin on it.
Exactly. And it's, they always talk about these dream teams of comic book writers and illustrators and stuff. And I'd have to say Grant and Liam should be on the top of that list. I mean, because they've far surpassed what I believe, looking back to the very first issue when this came out, season 1, they far surpassed anything that I felt they were going to make. You know, I've been amazed every time an issue's come out. And not only that, I find myself more and more looking forward to the next issue than I have currently.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, when we look at conversations like this, I know there are going to be some people out there that are going to say, well, Myron, you didn't ask him about 5G or Dan Didio. What an opportunity. You could have asked him those kinds of questions. Again, at the end of the day, I'm a fan, and I also try to approach these interviews as professionally as I can. And one of the things that I do, just to kind of pull the curtain back a little bit, when I'm talking to somebody creative and we're asking them to come on the show, they're doing us a favor. They're not getting paid by DC to do this. So they're doing us a favor. And so one of the things I do ask up front is are there topics that you want us to avoid? Because we don't want to put you in an awkward position. Should be a friendly conversation. And two, what do you want to make sure we ask you? And in Liam's case, he really didn't want to talk about Dan Didio and 5G because it's not. He's not
that podcast. It's not our podcast.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And I don't think we should. I don't think you and I, as working on this podcast together, should subject anybody to that, because technically speaking, there's other podcasts that can delve into that deeper than Liam has to offer. And to put a point on Liam, personally, he took his time out of the day to come and talk to us about it. We should be talking to him, and we're obligated as fans of him to talk about the Green Lantern series and him working with Grant Morrison on it.
Yeah, to me, this is more of this is not me trying to get a clickbait headline. This is me trying to have a conversation with Liam Sharp and sharing it with a broader audience who also appreciates his work, and giving them a chance to hear Liam Sharp's voice and hear him talk about what he thinks about Green Lantern, because that might color and inform their enjoyment of the title. And I'm not going to do something to jeopardize that, A. And B, I want Liam to feel like, maybe he wants to come back on the show at some point to talk about something else. When we interviewed Robert Venditti for the first time, it was something I asked for, but then after that, he was very open to, hey, let me know when you want me to come back on again. And we had Robert Venditti on this podcast 5 times during his run, which is kind of unprecedented in some ways. And so I look at it like, I'm trying to give people a window into the creative process as a fan. And
that's what we're here for,
Mm-hmm.
and we're like you said, we're not here for the clickbait, we're here for the fandom just as much as anybody else out there that likes Green Lantern as much as we do.
Exactly.
And Liam conveyed that message quite clear on how much he enjoys drawing this character.
Exactly. So, my friend, let's wrap this up, and I'm going to try to get this episode out in fairly short order. I know we just did an episode last week that I think I published over this past weekend, so I might hold this until the weekend, but we will get it out shortly for people to enjoy, and I hope they do enjoy it. I love doing the interviews.
I do too, and I like hearing about their personal exploits, and the process that goes into making these books for us fans, And anybody out there who's not really familiar with Liam Sharp, other than just a Green Lantern, they should go check out his other work. I mean, the guy's just a stellar artist. I mean, on all his fronts, and the stuff he does is just it's a game changer for artistry.
All right, friends. Well, we will be back in a couple weeks when we have issue 2 of season 2 of Green Lantern. And until then, please treat each other well, power ring charge that battery up, and make every day your brightest day.
All right. We'll talk to you guys soon.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.